Today we're going to be talking about some awesome services that can drastically speed up development. And if you've never heard of them, you'll probably want to start using them right away. But I'm also going to be talking about why so many companies end up migrating from those awesome services to AWS in the end. Why would that be if those services are so awesome? And why should you go through the trouble of starting your project on those services just to end up migrating to AWS at the end? Hopefully by the end of this video, this will all be cleared out. And at the end of this video, I'm also going to talk a little bit about a new startup I'm starting, and I want to hear your feedback on it. So let's get straight into it. To start, I want to talk about hosting. When we start a new project, we usually start it locally, so that only we can see what we're building. But at some point, we want to show this to other people. And when that time comes, we want a hosting service. So there are many services out there. If you're going to host it on AWS, you're probably going to think of S3 with CloudFront, or maybe Fargate with containers, or maybe directly into a EC2 server. But this can take a little bit of time, and you need a little bit more knowledge on AWS to make it work. But there is an awesome service that you probably already heard of it, which is Vercel. Vercel is really good, and it actually leverages the AWS infrastructure to build some awesome stuff. And it's completely free to start, and you don't even need to use your credit card to make your account. Vercel already comes with a lot of good defaults for serverless apps, and by default you already have an automated pipeline to deploy your app every time you push it to the main branch, and you get your domain as a subdomain of Vercel, which you can customize to your own domain if you have one, and you can do a lot of cool stuff like analytics and logging and stuff like that. So yeah, basically an awesome service, but it has its drawbacks, and I'm gonna talk about it soon. Another alternative to hosting that I personally don't have a lot of experience with is Netlify, which is kind of similar in some aspects with Vercel, and it's quite famous, so you might want to take a look at it. But yeah, let's go to the next topic, which is databases. Basically are the two things you need at a simple project, right? Hosting and a database. So for databases, we have a lot of options right now. Usually for my recent projects, I've been sticking with SQL for most of them. And a really awesome service that I've been using is PlanetScale, which is similar in the point that you also can start your account without making any payments, without using your credit card. And with it, create your database and start using it right away. You don't have to use any of the other features they have. You can basically just use a database and be happy with it. But they have some really awesome stuff. For example, one very cool feature on PlanetScale is that your database basically works as GitHub. You have your main branch where production data is in, and you can have some feature branches that will copy the data from the main branch, and you can test out some migrations and maybe some new features there. And then if everything works out, you can delete this branch and do the same thing on the main branch. Honestly, I haven't used this feature a lot yet, but I feel it's gonna be very good in a later stage of my project. So yeah, definitely check it out and you won't regret it. Another alternative for databases that you could use is Railway, which personally I haven't used it yet, but I really want to try it. And it seems to me that it's actually easier to start than PlanetScale. But basically they're both very easy, so it doesn't matter that much. So yeah, hosting and databases are basically the main two areas that you're probably gonna use in almost every application that you build. There are other areas like WebSockets for real-time stuff. There are also some services out there that are nice for this. And there are also cron jobs and other stuff like that. But basically the main thing that you're always gonna need is database and hosting. So let's get to the next part. Why a lot of companies end up migrating from those services to AWS in the end. And there are many reasons to it, but I believe the most important ones are security, flexibility, and pricing. And you might be thinking, what do you mean? You said those services are free. And they are to start, but they are actually leveraging the AWS infrastructure under the cover. So that means that when you're gonna scale up your application, you're gonna have to go to some paid plans, and those paid plans are actually a little bit more expensive than you could get if you used AWS. But it might actually be a little harder than you think, because using the AWS infrastructure to build a very good architecture to make it cheap is not that straightforward, and you might have some trouble doing it. And going to the second reason, which is flexibility. In AWS, you can basically leverage all their infrastructure services to build basically everything you want. You can even build those services from scratch, like PlanetScale and Vercel. If you have the time, you can do it. They are doing it. They are using AWS to build their stuff. So you have a lot more flexibility if you're using it. And in some cases you might need it depending on the project and what your company is aiming for. So yeah, there is that. So we've already talked about pricing and flexibility. So let's talk about the third one, which is security, which I think is probably the most important reason for the migration itself. The database is one of the most critical parts of your application. If someone gets control of it, it can basically hijack your whole app. And by having your database inside a subnet, a private subnet inside your VPC, that means that even if the hacker knows all the credentials for your database, it won't be able to access it. Because it's completely on a private subnet, to be able to access it, it would need to access something that is inside your VPC that has access to the database, which is almost impossible. But if you're doing your app with like Vercel and Scale, you basically need to have a public database, which is completely unthinkable if you're using it on AWS, because it's like super bad practice to have a public database. Basically, you are one leak away to having your app completely hijacked. If someone gets hold of your credentials for the database, they can access from their local computer and they can basically do anything they want. You can basically see on the Vercel official documentation that to use the database from inside the Vercel's API, you need to have a public database. You cannot even have a fixed IP address that you can like block traffic for only this IP address, because it uses serverless architecture on the backend. Your IP will change a lot, so you need to have a completely public database to use it. And they actually advise you to rotate your AWS credentials just to make it a little bit less bad. So yeah, if you're working alone on a side project and you're confident that you won't leak your database credentials, this might not be a very big problem for you. But when your company starts growing and you have a lot of employees, the chances of leaking the database credentials gets quite big. And in that case, it might be very bad for your company to have a security problem like that. So that's one of the main reasons I believe most companies end up migrating from those services to AWS. But does that mean that you should start on AWS instead of starting in those other services just to then migrate to AWS in the end? I don't think so. I think you could start on those other services, because on the beginning of a side project like that, you will want to output the most value you can in the smallest amount of time. And those services will help you do it a lot faster than using AWS at the start. There is a very big chance that you won't even go further with this project, so starting with like some complex stuff is not a very good idea. So I believe you should leverage all those like easy to use services that are really good. And if your project starts growing up and you start thinking on making it an actual business, then you can start thinking on migrating it to AWS at some point. At least that's how I think. So finally, let's talk about the startup I'm trying to make. And I actually had this idea while preparing this video. And the reason is, it's because when I was thinking about like the main things I usually use on a project, one of the things that popped up a lot is image. And right now I'm still using S3 for images, even for my side projects. I couldn't find like a really good image storage service that would have like some good defaults on the infrastructure. So yeah, I'm still using S3 for my stuff. And I think this could be a very good opportunity to make like a similar service, but for like image storage. I want to know what you think about it. Do you know some product that has some very good defaults like for performance and image uploads and stuff like that? Something that you can easily use on any app? Because I don't. I have been using S3 for a long time and I've searched for other stuff I couldn't find. So what I'm thinking is building like a storage service specifically for images, which is something that a lot of apps use. And you would have like an easy way to upload images and to manage your images and have like security related stuff and cache the images on the edge, so you would have a lot of good performance when downloading the images from the web and stuff like that. Tell me what you think about this service. And of course, I also want to make it like very easy to start using it, just like Vercel and Scale, so that you don't even need to put your credit card into it to start using. Yeah, and basically that's the base of the idea. Tell me what you think, if you actually want to use it, if you would pay something for it, and I also would appreciate some ideas, like some cool features that you think we could add to it. I'll probably in the future make another video about it, more in depth on what I'm trying to build. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff on my like startup journey and getting some updates from me, you might want to subscribe to my newsletter. I'm putting the link on the description. And if enough people subscribe, I'm thinking on making a weekly journal to talk about the things I'm doing and the progress on the startup and stuff like that. If you're interested, be sure to subscribe on the link below. And also be sure to subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up if you liked the video. And that will be it for today. I hope I see you next time. Mata né!